Welcome to the Hembury Books Podcast. Today we have Mark Whittaker, who is a Walkley Award winning journalist and author who has authored, co-authored and or ghostwritten 14 books. His true crime titles include Granny Killer and Sins of the Brother, the definitive story of Ivan Milat and the backpacker murders, and Love and Death in Kathmandu, which is about the royal family massacre in Nepal. Mark has been a regular freelance contributor to Good Weekend magazine, and he is currently senior features writer for Forbes Australia. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
Yes, I leapt at a comment you left on Adam Courtney's post when he came on the podcast, because I remembered a conversation with you in the green room at a Forbes leadership event last year when I was questioning you about all your books and your Ivan Milat book in particular. So I thought it would be amazing for you to come and talk about true crime. And I would love to find out, first of all, how you fell into writing true crime books.
Yeah, well, Adam and I were actually colleagues back in the late 80s, early 90s on The Australian, just doing news. And I think...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he might have been on finance as well for a bit. But anyway, as a young reporter, I must have been about 25 or something. I got assigned to the Granny Killer case and they asked me to follow it through to the end and make it my baby. And I did. And I uncovered a few things about his past, while you're waiting for the trial. Come on, you can't write anything much. But I found out about a bunch of crimes he'd done in Melbourne as a young man. And my colleague, Les Kennedy, who was working on the Daily Telegraph, got wind that I knew a bit about this guy. And he wanted me to give him the information. And I didn't want to give it to him, of course. It's my scoop. But then he said, how about we write a book about it?
Written the deal.
And so, I, of course, harbored some sort of ambition to be a writer. And by this time, I would have been about 26, I suppose, 25. And I thought, yeah, let's do that. And so we decided to write a book together. And I dutifully handed over my scoop to him, which was a bit of a mistake. But he went and then got some great pictures of Glover. Any pictures you've seen of Glover as a young man, they were obtained by Les Kennedy on the back of this information I'd given him. He had better contacts than me. And so we ended up writing a book as young reporters. Came out, I got it in my hand on my 27th birthday. We'll never forget that. And it was, as a young person to suddenly have a book in your hand, it's quite a buzz.
That is amazing. And what happened next?
Well, I know... We basically researched and wrote that book in 6 months. I'd never even read a true crime book, I think, up to that point. Mate, I'd probably read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood.
Love that.
But once we decided we were going to write one, I thought, oh God, I'd better learn this genre. So I read a bunch of true crime, and the classics like The Executioner's Song by Norman Mailer and what else? There was one on the Yorkshire Ripper called Somebody's Husband, Somebody's Son, which I just thought, I came to really like the genre. I think Andrew Rule's book about the Mr. Stinky case, I can't remember what it was called, but it was brilliant as well. And Andrew, of course, that was his young reporter turns author first effort, I think. He, of course, went on to do the Underbelly series and a whole bunch more, and he's very good at it. So I was reading all these books to inspire us, and we came out with this book. And our colleagues Sandra Harvey and Lindsay Simpson were also working on a book about the Granny Killer, and they didn't come out until about a year or 2 years later. And they'd spent so much more time on it, and we were pretty happy with our book, but theirs was better. And that's so we thought, let's do another one, and let's make it good like theirs was good. Let's spend longer on it. When these backpackers started to disappear, and we were reading about them in the paper, these parents were coming out looking for their children, and we were like, yeah, let's do one on this. I think it was pretty much the week we'd finished writing Granny Killer was the week that some of the German parents had arrived in Australia drumming up publicity looking for their children. So it was kind of a natural to look at. And when eventually Milat was arrested, we kind of pressed the go button on him and started working on it. In the following 2 years between his arrest and his conviction, there were 3 other people wanted to write books about Milat, but we determined that we were going to be the slowest and the best. And so, yeah, we came out years after the other 3 came out. And I think in this case, I think we were the best. And true crime is really a function of time. You've just got to go and find everybody whose name pops up, and you've got to find them and talk to them and just get them to tell you their story. And you sort of weave that all together, and that's how you get a good true crime book. You know, these quickies. 2 of those books came out 6 weeks after the conviction, so they're just entirely based on information that was already in the papers. You know, and they're just not that interesting. They sell well, but only for a short time.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I think also of the George Pell books that came out, I thought, wow, like it's so fast. Can you please tell, because maybe some younger viewers may not have heard of Ivan Milat or overseas, he's one of the worst serial killers in Australia.
Yeah, he's certainly one of the most notorious. For some reason, that case really seemed to resonate with Australians. I think it's something to do with our self-consciousness about overseas visitors having been so poorly treated. But yeah, he killed, what was it? Was it seven backpackers, 5 of whom were overseas backpackers. 2 of them were local hitchhikers. And yeah, he was arrested a year or 2 after the last bodies were found, after quite a mammoth effort by the police. And we got told something of his story, you know, through the courts and everything. But yeah, it's that added complexity that you can add by, you know, going out and talking to as many of his family members and people who knew him. And you just paint this picture of this very fastidiously tidy, non-drinking, always super in control, very similar to the Granny Killer in those regards. Also a bodybuilder like the Granny Killer, never played team sports, always insisted every blade of grass on their front lawn was always immaculate. That it was quite interesting how many of those commonalities emerge in their personalities.
Wow.
It allows you to unleash all your prejudices, but we like to think that the reader can unleash all of theirs. We don't put any value judgments on these people. That you'll never see the word evil in our books. The reader can construe such things themselves.
Facts. The words alone, the facts alone convey the power. How did you get Ivan Milat's friends and family members to talk to you? Wasn't there a degree of shame of ever being associated with him?
Look, not everybody. You know, we just went and knocked on doors. Basically, we looked in the electoral rolls, we found addresses, and we spent many weekends driving out to the outer suburbs, knocking on doors. And at first, it was quite amazing how little success we had. How many of those doors, thanks but no thanks, closed in our faces. But the longer it went on and the more certain it became that he was going to go down, the more comfortable people are with talking. And certainly once he was convicted, that increases, more doors start to open. So a lot of our best stuff we only got it after the conviction, when there were already 2 books on the street. Suddenly we were starting to make headway. And
Did you speak to his parents or siblings? He had a lot of 14 siblings or something.
Yeah, there were 14 kids in all, one of whom had died. So there were 12 surviving siblings. We spoke to half of them. Spoke to his mum, a bunch of the exes of his brothers, 2 of whom he'd had affairs with. They were very interesting sources of information. And it was that complexity of those family relationships which I think forms the most interesting part of the book. The first 100 pages, which is all the background of who he was and where he came from, is what I thought was the best part of the book.
From a psychological point of view, speaking to the mother of a serial killer, what is that like?
Well, as a mother, I don't think you can ever really think that your boy did it, and she didn't. But yeah, well, she paid lip service to the fact she didn't think he did it. We kind of got the feeling it was maybe a little half-hearted. She knew what she had to say, but yeah, she was happy to tell stories about what a good little boy he'd been. But we knew about some of his early childhood criminal matters, and were able to bring those up. And she talked about how the cops picked on him and how she'd go and bail him out, and because he was in trouble with the law from a very young age.
He was animals. Yeah, I was reading about it.
Yeah, and his brothers were also in a bit of trouble. You know, and they'd all had fairly wayward youths, but they tended to hit a fork in the road and go straight. And Ivan did too, ostensibly. He hadn't been in trouble with the law for quite some time when the murders that we know of began. But yeah, there was whatever that unknowable quality that makes a serial killer. Yeah, something in him had clicked.
Did you ever interview him?
No. We attempted to. We wrote him a few letters, but we were never going to try that, because he was professing his innocence with absolutely no basis. So we weren't going to try and suck up to him and say, oh, we think you're innocent, let us in and talk. We sort of said, we think that you're guilty, but if you want to try and convince us otherwise, we'd love to have a chat. But having set that parameter, he wasn't interested in.
Did he reply, or did he just simply ignore?
I don't think he did reply to us. He subsequently started replying to other people who were writing him letters, but those that I've seen, they were never of great interest, because he just would make facts up, and and he had many people believe those things that he made up to be true and would get in and support his innocence. But anybody who knew anything about the case knew that the things he was claiming weren't true. So it was pretty easy to dismiss.
Waste of time. Yeah. How did it work from a publishing perspective, taking the time to produce a really good book? Did you have a publishing deal prior, like as you embarked, to fund some of this extraordinary research that you did?
Yeah, we got a deal pretty early on. It wasn't a huge advance, so it didn't really pay for much. Welcome to Australian publishing. But they and Macmillan, they were really patient, and we outlined what we wanted to do, and they were, nervously but happy to hang on and be the last and be the best. And I think it paid. I don't know what the others sold, but I presume that over the long term we've now sold better than all the others. And when it came time to make a TV series out of it, it was us whose door people were knocking on. They weren't knocking on the other doors.
It was a big book. I mean, I looked on Goodreads. You've got over 500 reviews, and it's like 4.16, which is very high for Goodreads. Are you happy to disclose, because it was considered a bestseller, in a ballpark of how many copies that book sold?
Yeah, I've got no idea. I know it went through 50,000 quite some time ago, but it's really just been trickling fairly slowly since then. But yeah, I've got no idea of the more recent numbers, but it'd be somewhere more than 50 and less than 100. I've got no idea where.
Yeah. Is it hard to get immersed in researching true crime? Does it take you to a dark place where you sort of see humanity or you see the worst of humanity, don't you?
Yeah, I remember doing Granny Killer, and I found that very all-consuming the first time. And I'd go out somewhere and I found that I couldn't talk about anything else. It was all that was my brain was interested in engaging in. I don't know, a few years older, that didn't affect me so much with Milat. We were on that for 4 years, and some of that 4 years, there was wasn't working on it at all, but some of it was working on it a lot and having no social life, because it was all while holding down full-time jobs. So it was all at night and weekends, and it was less all-consuming. But I did notice then I was having nightmares, which stopped once the book came out. So that was welcome. But you kind of enter a place where you don't really feel like staying there. And so the genre to me became less appealing the older I got, because you just don't want to have your brain spending too much time in that kind of space. It's just interviewing those parents of the victims. My God, it's just so profoundly sad. I remember one interview in particular, I had to leave.
You had to leave.
One of the parents, she was so sad, my brain just went into neutral. I couldn't engage anymore.
Yeah, it is incredibly distressing. Do you see these books being important for the victims of these crimes to better understand what happened?
Well, there are certainly family members of the victims who see it as important, and it's a validation of the importance of what happened to their child. It's memorialising their child in some ways. Others, I don't know how they see it. They don't want to engage, and as you can expect,
Yeah.
It's what you find in journalism. It's sort of 50-50, those that want to engage and those that don't. And Yeah, and it's important for that reason, for those for whom it's important, but it's for the wider public. The women are by far the biggest readers of true crime, and I think that's because you want to know the enemy. You want to get, why on earth would you do this? That basic question, and that's you're thinking of the entire time you're doing it.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about why you think the genre is so popular, because on the one hand, it is so grisly and abhorrent and it offends every particle of our being. And on the other hand, there's an undeniable kind of fascination with humans who can behave like this. Would you agree? Like, why do you think it's one of the most popular genres for nonfiction?
Exactly what you said. We're just trying to understand the why. I mean, the how.
Did you ever understand Ivan Milat or the Granny Killer?
That's an awful question. No.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
How can you understand?
Yeah. No. It is just so off the charts. Did you also make some true crime podcasts? Like, were they spin-offs of your books, or were they separate projects for Audible?
They were separate projects.
Right.
One on a murder in the Northern Territory, and then one with Tara Moss on Ashley Coulston, and possibly attempting to pin a whole bunch more crimes on him. He was convicted of 3 murders, but probably balance of probabilities, there's probably a whole bunch more that he did. But yeah, Tara led that show. I was the investigative sidekick.
Cool.
The type of podcast with the investigative sidekick. That was me, and that was great fun. Yeah.
I did want to ask again from a publishing perspective, when with many of these individuals, they may have committed far more crimes. How did you and the publisher handle that unconfirmed, unproven information? Did you present it to the reader?
Yeah, I mean, that's all you can do. You present what you know, and I mean, in journalism we don't need a beyond reasonable doubt, do we? We just need,
Well, I mean, our defamation laws, there has a chilling effect, I think, in Australia.
Well, at least with Ashley Coulston, he's in jail, so for 3 murders. Pretty hard to defame him.
Yeah, true.
There were other such issues which arose with the Milat case, but yeah, we can't really talk about that. We've got to wait for some people to die before.
Well, he has died.
We've got to wait for another person to die before the rewrite of Sins of the Brother comes out.
Really?
You heard it here first.
Really? It needs a rewrite.
Well, once this person dies, all the stuff that the lawyers took out will be going back in.
Can you please notify me when that occurs? Love to have you back. Wow. See, this is amazing. This is the passage of time. What would your advice be to someone who would love to write a true crime book? Kind of the necessary steps to take. Contact a publisher, begin, see whether you've got any solid evidence.
Yeah, I mean, first find your story. I mean, that's probably a hard part. And then just start knocking on doors, and it's just talking to people and talk to every single person you can, and some of the doors will open and some will close, and every door that opens, they usually mention a couple of other names that you then have to run down. So I look at it like a house, at the start of your investigations, you're just looking at the front door from the street, and you start looking in windows and start knocking on doors, and it's about going into rooms, and suddenly a new room will open, and they totally say, "Oh yeah, I didn't think it would look like this in here," and then you knock on some more, and new rooms open, and hopefully you end up with a what looked like a little fibro from the outside is a grand mansion once you explore all the rooms. Another book that we were just about to jump on a plane to go to England to research John Wayne Glover, the Granny Killer, when I stopped off at a true crime bookshop in Prahran in Melbourne and bought a book called How to Write and Sell True Crime. And I looked it up yesterday in preparation for this, and it's still available on the internet. And I read that on the plane on the way over by Jeff Provost, I think.
Hey.
And yeah, there was certainly some of the lessons I learnt there in just in the writing section, I found the most interesting. A lot of the rest of it was finding publishers and just basic journalism sort of tips, but some of the writing thing I found fascinating at the time. Another thing that I found really influential was reading Tom Wolfe's The New Journalism, which I'd probably read a year or two before the Granny Killer Project started, and that certainly changed my life in just opening up a different way of thinking about journalism and how to write a story. If you ask me, a book that changed my life, it has probably changed my life more than any other single book. Reading that and just, it helped me. You've been a journalist for a few years, you're writing news sort of stories and the occasional feature, but you don't really have an intellectual notion of what you're doing. It gave me a way of thinking about writing. But
read that. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I was in the generation where you didn't have to go to university to become a journalist. So you're just sort of thrown in at the deep end and you start doing it. So you're never really forced to look at it sort of in an intellectual how-to kind of way. So yeah, I've been about 22, 23 when I read that. And yeah, it definitely changed my life.
Okay, I'm going to read it. You started publishing books in the 90s. How have you observed the publishing industry change?
Yeah. I know I've been told, I haven't tried to get a true crime published for quite a while now, but I'm told that podcasts have changed everything and that they've really gutted the market for true crime. And when we were young reporters, publishers were hungry for the subject matter. So to have your first book published, it was definitely an easy way in to the publishing industry back in the 90s. I'm told it's not so anymore. And that podcasting has really taken its place. And you can kind of get it because I listen to more true crime podcasts than I read true crime books. And, it's there, it's delivered right direct to your brain, and
But I love a book because it's so meticulously researched and well presented. A podcast is not as polished, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
What am I saying? I'm doing a podcast now.
Well, but yeah, I mean, I agree. Books tend to be better thought out, more linear, like a podcast tends to be, even some of the best podcasts, they can have long sections that, you can get on with it,
Yeah, I agree.
I'm always talking at my podcast.
I would just like to ask you about ghostwriting because you've also ghostwritten books. And could you tell us about your favourite book that you've ghostwritten, or a couple?
Yeah, I mean, I got a real buzz out of doing a book with Adam Gilchrist, one of his tour diaries back in the noughties, and ghosting Mike Willis's memoirs. That was great. In the true crime genre, Roseanne Katz's 10 years, about her being framed for attempted murder and spending 10 years in jail. That was pretty darn heavy. But since we're in the true crime thing, doing 3 books with Caesar Campbell, the former Sergeant at Arms of the Bandidos, that and the build up towards the Milperra massacre, and then his time in jail and the period after that, and then the last book was kind of like, Caesar's recently died, sadly, and there are a bunch of stories that he didn't want to take to his grave, but they're about a lot of crimes, and you just weren't exactly sure. Is he talking about himself here? Because he's talking about somebody else, these murders and things in the third person, and thinking, how much does he really, is this other person he's talking about real, or is he talking about his own stories? And I didn't want to know. I never bothered asking him because I didn't feel it was going to be appropriate. But it was a fascinating journey into that side of life that us, middle class people that, crossing against the lights. That's my biggest crime.
You don't scare easily, do you, Mark? You spend time with these people and you're not scared. Have you been in scary situations?
No. Yeah, I mean, often nervous. Like, God, that time we went up and Ivan's brother Michael, when we knocked on his door out in rural back blocks, Queensland. He told us to F off in no uncertain terms. And then we're driving away and Leslie said, he's following us. I'm not sure that I don't think he was, but we were we convinced ourselves that we were being followed.
He was behind you in a car?
In a car, yeah. Michael had spent a dozen or so years in jail for armed robbery in the 70s, robberies that Ivan had been along on, but Ivan managed to avoid conviction for those. And so he was a heavy character, looked exactly like his brother. We've got the little Hyundai, one of those things, city cars, pushing it up to 130 kilometres an hour, running away from this great big ute thing that was behind us, but we never, probably wasn't him.
Did you, you must have gone to the forest as well.
Yeah, a few times. And that was a pretty somber experience. Yeah, you try and get your head around these things and as best you can, but I'm not sure how well you can really do it. You just try and experience it and get a feel for it.
Yeah, it's really tough stuff. Really tough stuff. Thank you for sharing with us so openly about this is a behind the scenes of crime books. So amazing, Mark.
Anybody who is thinking about doing it, you've just got to, we didn't really know anything about it. You just sort of stumble in and do the best you can. And, and if you knock on enough doors and talk to enough people and make yourself expert enough in it, well, then it's just a matter of trying to write it in a fascinating linear kind of fashion. Chronology is king in these things. There's a writing thing. We came at it because we were taking so long to get to the murders. We kind of chopped it up into different sections when we first presented it to Tom Gilliat at Pan Macmillan, and he told us, no, just go chronological, and we did. So we had to sort of rearrange everything, and I think that's an important lesson. Just start at the beginning and tell the story.
It can be incredibly complex, I think, for a reader to follow anything that is not chronological. There'd have to be such a strong argument as not to go chronological, I think.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, chronology thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and these things are so complex, and there's so many people involved, sadly. Mark, where can people find out more about you and your books, and what is your favourite social media platform for connecting?
I don't really have much of a social presence. I'm on
Maybe it's Goodreads to find, because all your books are beautifully catalogued on Goodreads.
Yeah, you'll find them out there. I'm on LinkedIn if anybody really needs to get in touch.
Someone might have a piece of evidence for you, Mark.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, people do reach me with.
Do they?
Pieces, yes. So it's.
Have you had people say, "I want you to do a book on this crime that affected me or someone I love"?
No. Way more common is people getting in touch with me for their Ivan Milat stories. Everybody's got an Ivan Milat story.
My best friend's mum had a lift with Ivan Milat, which triggered my,
There you go. Well, did she really? I mean, a lot of people have scary experiences while hitching, etc. And I tend not to believe most of them, but everybody's got a story. I was at dinner with somebody on Friday night, and they had an Ivan Milat story. He'd written them a letter, and she commented on what beautiful handwriting he had. She's a lawyer.
Why had he written them a letter?
He was protesting his innocence. It was during that period.
Okay. But so what, people contact you and say, I accepted a ride with Ivan Milat and got out at the gas station or something?
Yeah, because he was acting freaky and that type of thing, yes.
Wow. This is just fascinating, Mark. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yes, it's been my pleasure giving me a chance to ramble on like this. I don't think I've ever done one quite like this one before with that writing side of thing in mind. People always want to talk about Ivan, but I think it's much more fun to talk about the...
From a fellow writer's perspective, and I've never been a crime journalist, but I have, covered some crimes, but it is endless. And I read true crime. So it's just fascinating to hear how you put that together. Because it is, you say, interview lots of people and present it in a way, but that's very hard. Easy to say, very hard to execute, I think. So hats off to you for being so successful with these incredibly emotionally and logistically challenging books.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. It's yeah, you got to want to do it because there's probably not a lot of money in it. The Milat book probably paid us back in the end, but gee, that was that was years down the track before you got your money back from all the effort, and most of the others
They
haven't
haven't. Yeah.
economically.
Yeah. And now you're a writer for Forbes. You and I used to be colleagues. Now you're interviewing the high flyers.
Indeed. Here's another book story. I was interviewing Jack Cowan from Hungry Jack's the other day, and I asked him what books had influenced him.
Yeah.
And he nominated Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, which was one of those very early self-help grow rich books from the 90s. And he said that had been extremely influential for him. And I'd also read it as a teenager because our rowing coach at school made us read it. And I told him that I read that and realised I'm not going to be rich because I don't want it enough, because it was all about wanting it. But that book did interview a bunch of writers and talk to them about, becoming a successful writer. And I thought, and I did take some of those lessons on board,
In that book,
uh,
are there lessons for writers as well as growing rich?
yeah. It's about success
More than wealth.
succeed. So I think I'd like to think I took some of those lessons on board as well, just about perseverance and sticking it out and having.
It's something you have in spades, an ability to craft a story.
Yeah, well, thank you. But yeah, and if you're going to go into true crime, that obviously helps. But yeah, just the willingness to knock on a door is the other thing you got to have, which of course was easier when it was Les and I, because we could hold each other's hand as we.
Yeah, I did think that, because it's that you could share some of the burden, I think, to be going through that together. But in journalism, what do we say? The door knockers and the ambulance chasers.
Yeah. Much maligned, but it's a skill that it'll always be useful, because there comes a point where no matter how connected the world is, sometimes you still got to walk up that garden path.
Okay, that's a great note to leave it on. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Yes, great talking.